Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to look at how to paint water in motion. So we're going to paint a lovely flowing waterfall over rocks. So grab your paints and let's get started. Right, we're going to begin by drawing in some rocks, and these are going to basically dictate the path of our water. So whether you want to, be copying exactly from me, or if you have got a photo that you would like to use, then it's completely up to you really. But this is going to be my way of guiding you through painting a little sort of study on water running down a waterfall and a stream. Basically what's happening is by painting in these rocks, we're getting a sort of path of where the water is running down. And of course water is going to be able to be sort of visible and shown up by the way in which it sort of interacts with these rocks and things. So just going to get all these shapes drawn in and then get the page wetted. Having drawn in my rocks, what I've also done is I've placed in these oval shapes, which are areas for me where the water sort of stays in a little pool before it drops down in its waterfall cascade down to the next level. And I think that's a really helpful way of just sort of almost sectioning off this painting, because there's quite a lot to take in here. So I'm beginning by wetting my page with my mop brush. If you don't have one of these, it's just a really useful brush to get a quick and even coverage of water or a wash of colour onto your page before you start painting, and it just means that you can work quite fast because of course the page will dry, especially depending on what kind of paper you use. I'm using the Langton Prestige cotton paper, cold pressed, which is from Daler Rowney, and it's a type of paper that I love to use. The cotton content in the paper is just really fantastic. Whilst I'm talking, I'm mixing a sort of shadowy set of colours. I've got burnt sienna, Paynes Grey, and then I'm sort of mixing the two together. And what I'm going to do with my size 6 brush is I'm just going to start by sort of painting in washes of these rocks, but I'm not just going to be just colouring them in. I am looking to create a sense of light and shade and shape on these rocks, so that they'll have sort of jagged edges and faces, some which hit the light and others which don't. And it really doesn't matter at this stage if things are bleeding all into one another. We're slowly building up layers. And whilst this is all still wet, it just means that we can be really swift and loose with the brush, and everything is blending really beautifully. Also going to just place in some colour sort of down the sides here. And I'm going to incorporate a little bit of green as well. But you can see I'm not just sort of simply colouring it in, I'm still sort of using the brush to create shapes. If I add in a little bit of Sap Green here and just dab it onto some of the sort of mossy rocks, We're going to be building up these layers as we go, but for now this is a really good starting point. And you can see how light the colour has dried, which is another thing to note, so don't be too worried if you place colour on and you think, oh my goodness, that's really dry, really dark, because it dries so much lighter when you've got a wet page and translucent paint. We also need to start creating a sense of the shape of the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sort of placing colour into the sort of around the edges of the pools of the water. So just from the rocks, and my brush strokes are now quite sort of flat and wide, and I'm using some green. And what I'm trying to do is trying to sort of create a path for the water. So we want to have unpainted space, definitely, that will be sort of coming down. But right now just sort of painting in from the shadowy sides. And just starting to maybe think about sort of a few brush strokes that are going to help the action of the direction of the water. But keeping them really quite loose and pale, very dilute and translucent at this point. I'm thinking where the water is going to be coming down between the rocks. It's going to be a slow build up, and gradually we're going to create this sense of the water, but already just those tiny actions with the brush strokes are going to help us create the sense of this water moving. The page is dried now, and essentially what I'm going to be doing now is going through the rocks and essentially painting them to really sort of bring out the darkness and things. And in painting everything sort of but the river, we're suddenly going to find ourselves with a really sort of light and bright flowing river with the dark rocks surrounding it. So I'm just going to work my way down now using combination of burnt sienna, Paynes Grey, and I've got some raw umber and some burnt umber as well. And using my size 2 brush, I'm still painting quite sort of loosely and freely, using sort of the brush angled quite low to the page, but it just means that in doing this I was suddenly creating much more of a sort of gulf down the middle where our river is going to run. And notice how I use the unpainted space and create sort of different faces on the rocks with this unpainted space. Angling the brush quite low to the page also can give you a slight sort of dry brushed feel to it. You see, where it sort of scrapes onto the page a little bit. Now we've got our rocks in place, what I've done is I've mixed up a bit more of a sort of greeny, shadowy colour. And I'm now going to start to actually create the sense of the water. So first thing I want to do is to paint in these sort of pools of the flat water. What I want to do is just be using the low angled brush and just sort of creating the areas of where the water is not moving quite so much. Still using a lot of unpainted space with the brush. And little sort of real areas of the darkness there. What we're trying to do is to contrast with the moving water areas, which are going to have a lot more catching the light of the splash of the water. And also rocks that we've got sort of sitting in the middle here, just almost creating a sense of the sort of shadow coming off them in the water. So it's funny, this tutorial being a how to create movement in water is more all about painting all the other bits that don't have movement in water until the absolute last moment. Okay, and a little bit more at the top there as well. Top there too. Okay, and now I'm going to take my slightly smaller brush and take my size 2 and my size 0. And what I want to start doing now is to create a little bit more of the sense of the movement of the water. So I need some colour on it first. So I'm gonna sort of start from the top and work my way down, and it's just a case of taking what we've already got. There we go, that's it. I was just trying to get a sort of minimal amount of water on my brush. Taking what we've already got here, and these sort of rippling actions help create that sense of the cascade of the water down the rocks. But it's not always just going to go in one direction, it's going to sort of peel out over certain areas. But the most important thing is that it keeps fairly sort of light and fresh, and that your brush needs to be moving in a nice fluid and swift manner. And if you are sort of at the side here and you're putting your waterfall and your cascade down in here, and then just in the side it sort of feels like, well, I'm not quite sure if this is working or not, so what I like to do is just imagine the rocks sort of just underneath the water there, sort of bleeding them into there a little bit, and then coming back over with the water, and then I might just pop in like one or two slightly darker little moments where maybe the water is just sort of parted a little bit to show a bit more of the rock. So we can place in maybe one or two of those a bit further up, but it's still going to be quite wet. So then I'm going to work my way down, so I'm still quite happy with that, and then there may be a slight sense of the water beginning to tumble over down here. It's up to you really whether you prefer going from sort of downward, going from sort of the top down, or if you prefer coming down like that. There isn't really a completely correct way, but essentially I guess the rule is finding the unpainted space and then creating a sense of the movement into it. So around, you can see here I've got some fairly light unpainted space, and I'm just going to have a sense of the water sort of pouring in from up around here, and it just feels like maybe now I need another rock that's sort of sat in there to give the water a feel that it's cascading down in between those two. So you will find now that you might want to be adding in a rock here or there. Of course, we need to be careful that the paint is still obviously going to be a bit wet at places, so popping in things, they could still bleed. I'm just going to work my way down until I've got all my cascades in. Now all my water's in, I can play around with a little bit of detail sort of on the rocks, and just with a much more sort of concentrated amount of colour, and maybe even place in a few little plants or branches. Maybe just the odd little one creeping in. Get my rigger brush in for this one. I think it's always quite fun to have a few sort of branches curving over a waterfall. Just can help with the composition of a piece really. And the rigger brush is just really fantastic for creating these lovely kinds of branches. So we'll just have one coming down over here. So I kept that area nice and sort of not too overly painted. So that we could add in a little bit of this extra detail. And then what we're going to do to finish off is we're actually going to add a few white highlights using some white acrylic paint, just to give us a little bit more of the spray of the foam. And then that will be us all done. So for my final stage, I've got some white acrylic paint here in my palette, which is nice and opaque. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add to the areas that have already got the unpainted space, and just create a bit of a splash. And even more of a highlight. I mean, you've got plenty of options with kind of sort of solid whites you might want to use, whether you can use a special sort of white pen, gouache, or even like Chinese white in watercolour paint. There is a such thing as a white watercolour, you see. But you can just see by adding these bits in, little dots, suddenly it really does become a bit more lively. So I'm just going to go through and find little areas where a bit of splash will just really help set things off. And there we have a finished piece looking at how to create moving, whoops, oh no, the washi tape is a bit strong there, oh well. How to create moving water. And really the biggest takeaway I can give you is firstly that this washi tape is a bit stronger than usual. I think I must have pressed it down really hard. And then also just about sort of creating the path for your water, and then it's all about building up the shapes and colours around the water to then leave you with the lightest space, and then if you want to add a little bit of highlight, just get a bit of splash at the end. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found that a really useful insight into water painting. I want to say a massive thank you to our patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. And if you never want to miss another video, then hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell, and we'll see you again next time. Bye!